Okay, it's not quite catching up on LinkedIn yet, but let's start. Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Ko wai au no he tangata tiriti ahau, no ini ahau, ko Baruch Jacob toku ingoa. Warm welcome everyone who's here today. My name is Baruch Jacob, I'm tangata tiriti from India. And those of you who have been to a few of these already know that if any of you are new here, these are really conversations with people that I really find interesting, particularly around innovation. And I kind of structure these conversations around three questions. The first is, what are you trying to change in the world? Second being, what is getting in the way of the change? And the third is, what are you therefore doing about it? And the people who come to these conversations are people I've known in the various parts of my life. Always people who have quite interesting perspectives, and always people with whom I've had really good conversations. And today's conversation is with Dr. Greg Morgan. One time, my boss, I think it was my boss's boss, and my mentor, and now definitely a friend and mentor now. And with Greg, we've had very wide-ranging conversations, both from libraries to innovation to sort of things of the spirit and of the heart that I haven't really had conversations with other people about. I don't really know where this is going to go today. Greg has refused to tell me what exactly he's going to be talking about. But I will bring him on in a second and get him to introduce himself, and we'll get into this conversation. Welcome.
Kia ora
There he
koutou.
is. Kia ora, Greg.
Hi. Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Baruch. Thank you for that welcome. Indeed, this is going to be quite a surprise for us because we don't generally have our conversations in public. Well, we have them in public places, but not in front of other discerning persons. So that's been a long time. So you said introduce myself a little bit. So
Yes.
First of all, let's just clear the doctorate out of the way, because people sometimes think that the doctorate is about something that is screamingly irrelevant. And of course, it's very relevant, because I did a doctorate in 14th century English. So, I mean, it couldn't be more of the moment if you tried. And what I was attempting to do was to edit a text and from the spelling, which is most unreliable, determine the dialect that the text was written in.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I know. So it was another life long ago. And I stayed at university for some time. I was the first person in my family on either side to go to university, or to complete high school, or to finish fifth form. So it was a pretty special time for me, and I enrolled in 1980. The hope of my mother, the dream she had always had for further education, and it came to rest in me, not my siblings, but because they chose otherwise, but me. And so for $81, I enrolled in a full-time university program at the University of Auckland. And $55 of that was the Students' Association fee, so work out the tutorial fees.
Oh,
yes, anyway, and so I stayed for a decade. And then I thought I'd better get a job, and I ended up working at the university library and the law library. I qualified as a librarian whilst I was working there, had a brief stint at Unitec, became the medical librarian, went to the Blind Foundation and managed the Talking Book and Braille Library for some years. And blind people continue to be a really important part of our lives because we have many friends who are blind. And I don't think there's a day goes past that I don't use some of the learning that people have been generous enough to give me over the years in that place. I was on the board of the foundation a couple of times. And then I went into public libraries. And of course, the whole point of going into public libraries was to meet you. And just before I turned up in public libraries, I had been baptized. So I was not brought up in an active church-going family, but I found myself at a church and by design was baptized and had become a lay preacher probably even before I was baptized, I think. So I've done a lot of preaching. And so I generally get captive audiences who have to listen to what I say because it's impolite to walk out during a service. And I nail my friends, such as you, Baruch, to the wall, so you have to listen to me. But other people don't generally get me to go on about faith things. So I thought I might make that the focus today. So I worked in public libraries and ended up in community development for a couple of years, went through the amalgamation, ended up in the library's lead team, found myself working in emergency management, which was very interesting, civil defence emergency management, and doing quite a big role there. And then left and was working for a church for a couple of years in a ministry team and doing outreach. And I've just gone back to work at the council again in emergency management. So that's that. That's the context in a nutshell.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Do you, looking back now, does it feel like there's some sort of thread through all of that, or is it just a fanciful?
I have always joined the dots, and I've always been able to see the dots. And so sometimes I think, am I just listening to my own spin? And perhaps I am. But I was talking to a friend of ours the other day, Alison, who used to be our super boss. And I said to Alison that I have gone back to former places of employment 3 times in my career, I think. So I went back to the university library. I went back to libraries, public libraries from community development. Went back to the foundation's board for a second go, actually, sort of 4 times. And now I've gone back to emergency management after being in a different role. And there are absolutely connections. And the connections are all about people and about equity and around inclusion. At the moment, I'm like everybody else, I'm gasping as I look at the events on the world stage and thinking about these big projections of how people live in society and the complexities around that. And we have everyday examples of that in our own being. And we have many, many lessons to be thinking about here. It's not just always about looking out at the world and what we see to be inequities in other places. They are here, they're part of our heritage, they're something that we are called upon to address in our time. So I kind of do the soaring thing, I go up and I see great big dots and connections, and then I come back to small at-home things. But yes, I've always been able to connect it up, and and my career does not feel illogical to me. Well, maybe the 14th century sequence does. I'm not sure. I would do that again if I had a second go.
I know, I don't think I quite knew that is what you examined, and that's quite interesting to me because it feels like quite a. I'm not trying to understand the dialects. It feels like quite an investigation, right? Trying to unearth something.
It was the language of Chaucer, a dialect very close to Chaucer.
Yeah, that's right.
But the interesting thing is that the topic of the text, they were Anglo-Norman sermons, which had been turned into Middle English because Anglo-Norman, moved from Latin into Anglo-Norman because Anglo-Norman was the language that people could read, except that nobody could read it. It was never a popular language. It was an elite language. And so then sermons were turned into Middle English. And, into English. They didn't know it was Middle English. And there were sermons. So towards the end of my study, when I was focusing on trying to finish the thing, I kept getting interested in the source material and the content. And then I started being interested in how the stuff would have been preached. And I had actively to stop myself going there because, you need to finish things. And so it's interesting that subsequently I found myself a member of a church and, in various church roles.
Did the PhD itself have a role with you sort of becoming churched? I don't know what the right word is.
I don't know how interested in all of this people will be. When I was 6 years of age, being brought up in a house where we did not go to church, I frightened my father by sitting at the kitchen table, and I was writing something on a pad. So I don't know whether people still have those pads with the very wide lines that small kids write on. I can see myself writing on that. And Dad said, "What are you writing?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a hymn." Now, this is very curious to me. Every time I think about this, I laugh because, as you know, I'm as musical as a fish. I mean, I just am not musical. I wasn't playing any kind of instrument, and we didn't go to church. So I guess I must have seen something about hymns on television. Well, Dad was quite worried at this and didn't know that I should be allowed to do it. And he thought he'd better ask me. So he asked my mother and said, he's writing a hymn. And she said, well, that's just fine. I mean, let him do that. So interesting. So as I look back, I think I could see quite early the spirituality in me. I wouldn't have used that language because I was a kid. I believe that I could see it. And I also believe, looking back in ways I'm not going to go into today, that I knew I was gay and that the two are connected. They are so much the essence of it. And so there are many moments in my life when I think I've arrived at the point which has always been waiting to express. And so, meeting my partner and living with him and marrying, that has certainly been another of those. It's like the purpose that was just waiting to find its time.
Yeah. And I find it really interesting that writing a hymn, but also what you've been saying about how that kind of spirituality is almost underpinned all of who you are ever since. Because when I think of our conversations,
come on, it's your heritage too, right?
Yeah, yes, and I mean, I tell people I'm religious, not spiritual. Like, I'm culturally religious. So it's like I'm not the spirit of it, but I do find it interesting that our conversations have been so of the spirit of the Wairua. The Wairua seems to be the thing that kind of underpins a lot of our conversations. If I were to ask you this thing about what you're trying to change in the world, does the spirituality sort of play a role for you?
Yeah, it does. So you asked me that question the other day when I said, what will you be asking me? So you sent me that. And I thought about it not very much at all, to be honest, because I thought, well, let's just have a conversation. But there have been a couple of things playing through my mind this morning. And one of them is that biblical line, where the angel of the Lord says to the prophet, despise not the day of small beginnings. And I think that we have the capacity to see spirituality, by which I mean something that matters in lots of small things. And I don't believe that is a call to live our lives small. Not to live our lives small, but to take note of what is happening in our lives, even if it is sometimes a very delicate shoot of something starting. So there's that. And then the other piece is, well, what is the thing that I'm trying to change in the world? Well, there's a new version of Serenity Prayer. Now, I've not ever done a 12-step program. I haven't got the endurance, but people who have, and other people too, know the Serenity Prayer. It's very famous. There's a new version of that which a minister in the States uses. Her name is Reverend Dr. Temple Hayes, and she has this slightly different version. And she says that the Serenity Prayer could be, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that that would be me. And,
wow.
In every which way, responsible living, all the stuff that I look at on the television and I think, gosh, I should be doing something about X. The change has got to be me and my response to a situation. Religion, faith, spirituality does not answer for me the great injustices in the world. I can't write those away easily by saying, well, matter of faith. I cannot write them away. The job is to think, how should I live differently? Because thank God, thank the universe, those circumstances are not my circumstances, and I have a responsibility.
That's really interesting also, because again, some of the context we have spoken about and we have worked in has been around systems change, right? And I think earlier today, I'm part of I think there's 5 of us, and we call ourselves the Ramble Pod. And we get on a call, Zoom call, every couple of weeks, and we ramble together. sometimes slightly separately, and it's verbal rambling as well. Anyway, and it's interesting because today we were talking about systems and systems change and changing the systems and the inner work of changing the systems. And I feel like that's exactly what you're touching on. It's sort of if you're trying to change what's outside and we're trying to bring more justice in the world, the thing to change is ourselves. It's the inner work that enables the outer work. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I am drawn to all sorts of mystic traditions, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that we are all gifts into the world as we are. And really, the only power we have is the power over ourselves and how we are and how we recognize ourselves to be the gifts. And all of that, you know, all of that is just language. And I know that immediately people are going, but what about? And that's all true. What about? I get all of that. But our reality is now. And the past is what we perceive it to be now. The future is what we're thinking now can be, and we can work towards. There are people who disagree with me when I radically say that. I don't understand their arguments, but I know they disagree with me. There's a wonderful prayer by Marianne Williamson. So Marianne Williamson's an interesting person. You know, she stood for the Democratic nomination, and she's still standing. She survived her campaign. You might not know it because there is not much media attention. She used to poll at around about 10%, but she got no mainstream attention. The Democratic Party in the States went straight into finding its nominee without really having debates, etc. Anyway, all of that aside, she's also a spiritual leader. And she has this neat little prayer about being protected from the temptation to enter the nothingness of time, And for me, that phrasing is around obsessing about the past, being trapped by the past, fearing the future, nothingness of time. In fact, we've got the present of where we are now. So it's a very long, rambling answer. You know, that is a rambling answer too. But it was an attempt to say, yes, you're right. That's how I feel.
No, I find it really interesting because, the what do you call it? What did you just say? The not being trapped in the past, but also sort of, I was just thinking when you're saying that, because we sometimes trap ourselves in the future as well, don't we? You know, I can't live now because I'm so trapped by the future of what I want.
And the whole hope thing, you know, the whole hope thing can feel that. So let's just hope someone is coming to rescue us, you know. And the hope might even be that somehow miraculously tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up and I'm a completely different kind of person. Just test your experience on that. You know, hope might well be what we are creating for other people by what we are doing today. I think it has to be something. It can't be just the stasis of waiting. So as we know, we can trap other people by closing off the freedom they have to be who they are by constraining them. So perhaps we can build some hope.
And I also like that you seem to be setting that, so the hope that we create is for other people now, rather than, again, it's not the future or the past, right? It's now.
And we know that the world is not short of empty promises.
No, gosh, no.
It's not short of that.
And then this change, Greg, I mean, trying to change ourselves and trying to change ourselves. What gets in the way? What has been getting in your way?
What gets in the way, and it's always got in my way. It's one of the reasons that I stayed at university a long time. The fear of discomfort, which actually limits our growth. So, you know, everybody's now rushing, everyone's keen to rush forward with a story of origins that were in a certain way, and this is what I've become, and all of that. So when I think about that, I think being brought up in 1960s in New Zealand in a very working class house, but it was quite secure, and most of the people around were similar kinds of people, similar sorts of families. So I can say that as a Pākehā male, and that was my truth. For years, I lived in this very comfortable setting. And the sort of system stuff that you help us challenge, Baruch, is to think, well, yes, but that wasn't ever the whole of society.
No. Yeah.
And in fact, it was a lovely, comfortable way of living a life built on a whole lot of imposed disadvantage. And so, that comfort thing, not realizing early enough what the cost of the comfort that some of us have. That's certainly a limiting factor. That said, once it's realized, it's when it's realized. So it's not too late either.
When you say cost of the comfort, do you mean the cost to yourself of the comfort or the cost to others of the comfort? Both?
Well, I mean, you can, I guess, what would I think? I guess I could think that through and come to some quite elaborate theories on it. But so long as we believe that everyone is connected, everybody is a part of the whole, the cost to some degree is a collective cost.
Always,
we can chase the spreadsheet on it and go, well, my cost is this percentage and someone else, but we know that it's everybody's.
Well, that's a really interesting point as well, because that's the other thing when we're talking in relational context is, well, exactly that, right? If I'm trying to change the world, then I do that by changing myself. And if I change myself, the world changes around me, but also the costs. And the costs, if I pay a cost for something, I'm not paying it alone. And there's other people paying that cost as well. It's other people and being liberal with not limiting peopleness to humanness. Like the cost of the planet of our comfort, for instance. And, all of inequity, right? There's the cost of comfort.
And it's interesting to me watching, for instance, your posts on LinkedIn and posts of other people, sort of the clever folks who are in the design world, and to watch the points at which you become irritated with the paradigms. You're pushing at the paradigms, and quite often the sense that people have is the thing I've been employed in is not the best thing that I could have been employed in. And then people deal with that and realize, well, it's what I've been doing and it's not a bad thing. It's just what I've been doing. So all of that is the growth urge, isn't it? It's the growth urge for the paradigm not to become the final definition of anything.
Yes, of anything. Yeah.
It's a tool. Everything is a tool, and we have to pull ourselves back from worshipping the tool.
Yep. And how do you do that? How do you pull yourself back from worshipping the tool?
So there are many ways, of course, to do it. There are myriad ways, but it is the practice of detachment, of pulling back from things, even things that you really like doing or that you feel define you. And recently, I've been going through a stage of something which has been quite a sort of retreat from something which has defined me, and I think that's really interesting, and I keep observing that. And as you can tell, I'm, not going into precise details, but I keep looking at it and I keep reassessing the attachment. What does that feel like today? And then observing myself, seeing the attachment. And it's a very old technique in some spiritual traditions to keep observing yourself, to realize that your thoughts and you as the observer, they're not the same thing. And so you just keep observing and observing and observing. So I'm doing a version of that recently.
How's that going? Without telling us specifics or something. How are you feeling about all of that? Is it?
Well, here I am talking. I think isn't that life? I mean, life is about opening to the new thing all the time. Which is why we have all those parables about funny little things, tiny little mustard seeds. They're all about being open to the possibility of growth, when it would be simple just to obsess about the small thing and to think you were keeping it safe somewhere. So
I find this.
So, I can remember saying at one point, I'm having my midlife crisis. And somebody said to me, but you can't be having a midlife crisis because you were too young. So now, of course, I'm on the other side of that. And people are saying, well, you should have had that long ago. You should have had it long ago. And I do sometimes joke about those things, but I try even to pull back on the humor about those now. Because actually, we can just be alive. And I don't know that there is the right time to be having a midlife crisis, or through the grace of God, that we need to be stuck to one. Let's have multiple crises.
Yeah, true. I mean, especially, in the context of the innovation again, from crises comes growth, right? And that's where you figure out the next thing. If there is no crisis, if you're comfortable, what's the point? Why would you bother changing anything if you're comfortable?
Well, I used to write essays, and I must have quoted this, 6 times. The poet Blake said, without contraries, there is no progression. Without contraries, there is no progression. Of course, the trick is not to get so devoted to contraries and polarizations that there are only polarizations.
That's only polarized.
Take heed. But it's about energy, right? And I think that's the truth, that there has to be the rub.
I think I must have been, I relate that very much to the yin yang, the taijitu, the black fish and the white fish that turn into each other. And I think I must have been in my late teens when it hit me. And I still remember that it hit me like a ton of bricks, that it wasn't a static picture. It's a constantly moving, and it's not even a two-dimensional thing as we see it. It's a flat thing. It's a round thing. Everything is constantly turning into everything else. I think that was the first insights that I don't know. I remember. I think someone was talking about Kung Fu. Watched way too many martial arts movies in my youth and now. But it was quite interesting. I still remember it making me. I had to sit down to process the thought. I had to sit down because it's that the contraries and the balance and the moving balance.
So we learn all sorts of ways to make these symbols bearable, and actually we make them flat. We're not open to the. We're not open to the energy in them. We just see them flat as the first way of seeing. Which is, why people keep returning to conversations, why you're doing your ramble.
The ramble pod, even the thinking lads,
otherwise they're just flat concepts and not enough to nurture us.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
I believe this has probably been the shortest conversation we've ever had, and probably be the most what do you call it? The most focused one. Imagine we haven't. I feel like we haven't quite stretched the edges of that. Maybe you want to do that in public.
That's also because I'm not trying to con you into doing something. So at this precise moment.
At this precise moment, I think it's about time I think I might start to try and con you into doing things, actually.
Oh, yeah, good luck. Excellent. Well, it's been great talking to you, as it always is. And thank you very much, seriously, thank you for the service that you do for so many of us, Baruch. You really you're a generous person, and you help us to see things in different ways, and you certainly have done that for me always. And so I thank you for it.
Thank you, Greg. And likewise, I think it's been really nice to bring some of these conversations that I have offline, bring them online and give other people a peek into the kind of richness that you offer. So thank you for that. And yeah, I'll end that there. So those of you who are still on, just a request, if I may. So I'm trying to start getting these streams onto the reflexive page, so it's not just attached to my name, a bit wider than that. So if you could go to the reflexive, what's it called? The LinkedIn reflexive LinkedIn thingy book jig, and like the page, it'd be really grateful. I need to get to the 100 to 150 people before I can start to live stream directly off that, and it becomes less about me. But yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you very much for Greg. Thank you very much for your time and energy. Kia ora, fam.